Michael Eric Dyson has been a powerful voice on a variety of issues that speak to Black America. In his new book, Tears We Cannot Stop, a sermon to white America, Dyson challenges them to stop ignoring police brutality and other injustices facing Black America. He also takes on Donald Trump. This is what he writes in the book. Whether he wishes to be or not, Donald Trump is the epitome not only of white innocence and white privilege, but of white power, white rage, and yes, even of white supremacy. According to the New York Times Book Review, Dyson's latest work, quote, is one of the most frank and searing discussions on race, a deeply serious, urgent book which should take its place in the tradition of Baldwin's The Fire Next Time and King's Why We Can't Wait. Michael Eric Dyson joins us via FaceTime from the West Coast. Of course, he's also a Georgetown University professor, political analyst, and ordained minister. All right, Michael, why this? Why this now?
Well, thanks first of all, Roland, for having me. Yeah, this now because, look, when I began to write this book, it was in the aftermath of the deaths of Sterling and Castillo due to police, I think, misbehavior, but certainly because of police action and behavior that led to their deaths. They were killed by the police, and I was outraged at the extraordinary callousness with which Black life was treated. So I sat down and typed out, if you will, an op-ed that then garnered over 2,500 responses from the New York Times that had to shut it down, and this book grew out of that. So my book was really in process long before it became apparent that Donald Trump might become the president of the United States of America, but I wanted to look at the backdrop against which his presidency rose and the ideas of white innocence, white power, white privilege that fed and fueled his rise. And as a result of that, to help us understand what's going on when we look at the face of Donald Trump and what surrounds us.
When you talk about focusing on police brutality, I mean, it's very interesting when I talk to folks who act as if this stuff doesn't matter. And I've made the point that if you are a woman, namely a white woman, and you are a doctor or a lawyer or a dentist or a professor, you likely have those jobs because of Title IX, which was passed in the early 70s, which most people don't even know is a provision of the Civil Rights Act. If you are the disabled, that comes the American Disabilities Act, come from the Civil Rights Act, 1964. If you are gay and you appreciate same-sex marriage, well, you better be thankful to Black folks in the Equal Protection Clause from the 14th Amendment. The point I'm saying there is Black folks have marched and died for laws that have benefited many other people as well. And so the police reform that you see out there for Black Lives Matter, that also is benefiting white America, not just Black folks.
That's right. That's right. That's a great point, Roland, as usual, because what's good for Black folk is good for America. We are the template of reformation and change that should occur in this nation, and we are often the spearhead of what eventually blesses the rest of the nation. The examples you've given are apropos. And so when we fight for justice, when we are courageously defending ourselves and others against the vicious expression of anti-democratic forces or racist forces or sexist forces or homophobic forces, those things enable the nation to become better at what it is supposed to be about, which is democratic experiments and democratic experiences for the masses of people. So our fight for justice, our quest for the truth is something that is extremely important. And our fight against what Donald Trump represents, the xenophobia, the racism, the sexism, the classism. And as you just brilliantly pointed out in the previous segment, a man who is ostensibly and supposedly committed to the interests of especially the white working class, though we are told we should get beyond identity politics. The reality is, on both the left and the right, we have to deal with the resistance to racial justice. Bernie Sanders on the left is a mirror image to a degree of Donald Trump on the right. I don't mean in terms of their politics and their ideology. I would flow with Bernie Sanders any day of the week over Donald Trump. But They are both elderly white men who didn't necessarily completely comprehend or deeply and profoundly understand the necessity for addressing and dealing with race. And the way in which Bernie Sanders was eventually pushed to deal with it suggests to us that even after the election, when he said that we must get rid of identity politics, that we must move beyond them, that it's easier to deal with racism and sexism, he said, than to deal with the economic inequality that prevails. I think that's a profound mistake. And I think that, again, what we find out is that whiteness becomes the unifying moment in American politics more even than class and gender. It cuts across class, it cuts across gender, it cuts across party as well.
Avis.
Hi, how you doing, Mike? This is Avis. You know, I find your argument here to be very compelling, and I have a couple of questions with regards to that. First, in terms of this issue of identity politics, in my mind, there really is no bigger identity politics than white identity politics, which quite frankly is the status quo. So in terms of the goal of your book, I think one of the biggest challenges that we face in terms of those of us who push for social justice is a lack of empathy, just to put it very plainly, among most white people with regards to issues which they do not immediately see as issues that impact their lives. How do you seek to move them in this book to really take ownership of the fact that unless, quite frankly, none of us are free unless all of us are free? How do you get them to sort of buy into that notion through your book?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that, Avis. Well, exactly. That's what I'm up against. And that's what I'm up to try to convince white brothers and sisters with moral persuasion, with political analysis, and especially with a kind of jeremiad, a preaching to their hearts and minds that the empathy gap is real. The inability to understand that my life is tied to your life. That ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. The reality is that we are tied together completely, and that unless we address white innocence, which is killing white people too, unless we address white fragility and white vulnerability, which prevents white brothers and sisters from coming to grips with many of the consequences of their own dire circumstances, we will not survive as a nation. Martin Luther King Jr. was in jail in Birmingham, and the white jailers came to him and said, look, your way is the wrong way, your demonstrations are wrong, and segregation is right. And then King, typical of himself, asked them, how much money are you making? And when they told him, about their economic condition, King said, heck, you need to be out there marching with us because you're being just as mistreated as the Negro. Given what the previous segment documented, the reality is that the white working class has no more better position with a Donald Trump administration than anybody else. What they do have is what they've been often offered. That is the compensatory value of whiteness. At least you're not a Negro. At least you're not Latino. At least you're not, and fill in the blank. And so being given this consolation prize of not being a person of color often doesn't pay off for white brothers and sisters, and they have far more in common with us as struggling African-American and Latino and other people than they do with the white overlords and captains of industry and entrepreneurs and the barons, the tycoons who are now running this country. The so-called blue-class billionaires is an oxymoronic statement. They have no deep investment in or profound understanding of the condition, the plight, and predicament of white brothers and sisters, and that's one of the things I hammer in this book.
Talk with Michael Eric Dyson about his new book, Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America. All right, Julian, question for Mike.
Michael, good morning. We got Michael here?
Yep, he's there.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
So,
Good morning, Michael.
I've read a lot of your works. I haven't read this book. I intend to. This is certainly one white American for whom you have all his ears. Thank you for writing this work. Question to you is, obviously in the last election, the white working class vote came out for President Trump in much higher numbers than it did in 2012. The question to you is, what's your argument to white working class America? How do you engage them in a discussion? What is your approach as we go into the 2018 elections?
Well, it's obviously extremely important, but I have to say, Julian, right off the bat, thank you for underscoring that point. Because if we speak to African-American people and the black working class, oh, that's horrible. That's a taboo. Why are you dividing America? Why are you being divisive? The very people talking about dealing with a transition to a universal claim that is beyond the issue of race has no sense of contradiction when we say, let's appeal to the white working class. There's a black working class, a brown working class, a yellow working class, none of whom actually went for Donald Trump. And they live not only in the urban situations and stations of life, they live in rural communities as well, as you well know. So what's interesting to me is that those who make the argument against identity politics reinscribe and reinforce it when speaking about the white working class. Having said that, it's extremely important to address the issues of class for the people of this nation, and especially white working class people. My argument is the following, that the policies and recommendations put forth by the Trump administration, as evidenced by some of their first gestures, do not bode well for the masses of white working people in this country. The gulf between the have-gots and the have-nots continues to widen. The economic disparities and the financial disparities and the class disparities between those who make $150,000 and up and those who make $250,000 and up over the top in terms of the most elite 1% versus the masses of people at the bottom, their situations will not be enabled or helped by policies that are addressed for tax breaks for the wealthy and for thinking about in which business must prevail. So I would argue that the white working class has much more in common with the plight and predicament of ordinary black and red and yellow citizens than it does with those who are wealthier in this nation.
I got 2 minutes, and I need to get 2 more questions in. Steve.
Michael, what would you say to somebody like me who agrees with you that racism is still a problem in the United States, that there are serious racial issues? However, if you're talking to white America, and you include Italian Americans as white America, that when you attack entrepreneurs as the problem, I'm from an immigrant family, but I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm immediately turned off by hearing that broad generalization. How do you communicate with me when you use that type of language, which is divisive?
Well, first of all, to argue that what's divisive is the recognition of things that divide us already, that have marginalized black and brown and red and yellow people, that's one thing. Number two, you can hold on to your specific ethnicity. And I address this in the book, Jewish, Polish, Italian, Irish, and the like. But the reality is that's in the old country. In America, people don't make a distinction between you as an Italian American and the difference between you and a WASP.
You're wrong about that. You didn't grow up in Texas in the 60s.
But I'm telling you, people who look at you in terms of white privilege don't look at the specificity of your ethnic iteration.
I hear it all the time.
In America, let me finish my point. Then you can. In America, the crucible of race pulverizes particular ethnicities. I'm not saying that your ethnicity has been erased. I'm saying you are a candidate for whiteness in a way. Read the book, Noel Ignatiev's book, How the Irish Became White. Read the book, How the Jews became white. So I'm telling you that, of course, there is specificity of ethnic identity, but in American culture, whiteness functions in such a way that it absorbs your identity as well. That's all I'm arguing.
Bill, I need a quick question. I need a quick answer.
So a quick question, Michael. Thanks for the book. It turned out in this election that union members, white union members, voted for Hillary. They didn't vote for Donald Trump. If we had the union density that we had at the beginning of the Obama administration, then Trump wouldn't have won. That's the margin that of victory for him was this decline.
Okay.
What about speaking to the types of institutions like unions that bring working class people together, and the attacks on those institutions and those things that try and prevent us from having a unified voice for the working class?
That's an excellent point. And the reality is that, again, forging those links and connections between working class people of all races, hues, and stripes needs to be accentuated. But never forget, Richard Nixon used white working class people and unions to try to break the notion of, of Democrats by introducing a notion of affirmative action, because he knew it would reveal the inherent racism of many of these groups. Because let's be real, white working class people have also participated in the drama and pageantry of prejudice and racism too. Only when they overcome that racism and see their livelihoods connected to African American and Latino people can that possibility of class solidarity prevail. Remember, W.E.B. Du Bois said that often working class people are giving the psychic wages of whiteness. At least I'm not a Negro. When we overcome that, we're a much stronger nation and we have greater class solidarity.
Folks, the book is called Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America by Michael Eric Dyson. Michael, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Kickstart your day at 7 and get the news you need from the perspective you want. NewsOne Now with Roland Martin, every weekday morning at 7 on TV1.